Welcome everyone. I'm building a game with evolving creatures. Not Pokemon-style evolution with predefined stages, but actual evolution with DNA, inheritance and natural selection, so creatures adapt to your playstyle and you may encounter foes that no player has ever seen before. Since the last video, I've made lots of progress on things like creature attacks, new characters, weapons and the UI. But today I'd like to discuss a topic that is more unique to my game. How can we combine a fun action role-playing game with an evolution mechanic? There are many possible approaches to this, and this video will present 3 of them. I'll also show off a first prototype, and I have some surprise announcements for you. So, sit back, tune down your arachnophobia, and get ready for another look behind the scenes of Where Beasts Were Born. As shown in my other videos, the core of the genetic algorithm is simple. Creatures with higher performance mate more often, so successful traits tend to get carried on to future generations while others die off. But I want my creatures to automatically become smarter and adapt to your playstyle. So I have to build an evolution system which is centered around the player and their actions. Putting this into a game is far from trivial. The main issue is that evolution is a slow process. It often takes many generations to evolve a noticeable change, and it requires lots of trial and error. In the game, this would mean players fight thousands of very similar creatures before seeing any meaningful change, and that's in stark contrast to the fast pace of an action RPG. To speed things up, mutations can have large effects like legs suddenly appearing from one generation to the next, but this doesn't really fix the problem of having to test lots and lots of creature variations. The choice of the fitness score is another important issue. It will need to be based on the player's actions and will have a large influence on evolution. Lastly, the generator is a bit resource hungry. Sadly, these interpretations that I've been showing are not created in real time, so the amount of creatures I can create is limited. I have 3 possible game setups to tackle these challenges. I think the first approach that most people think of is what I'd like to call real-time evolution. Creatures in a level go about their business, collect resources, and when they encounter another creature, they might reproduce. If they encounter a player or hostile creature and die, they will stop reproducing. This is very close to what happens in real nature and might be fun for the biology fans here. But it requires me to build a full-blown simulation of many complex systems that are unrelated to the actual player interaction. Even worse, a player may not even notice most of what's going on in a level, and for the creatures it may be best to avoid the players entirely. If you're into this sort of thing, I can recommend some very cool indie projects like Adapt, The Bibbits, The Sapling, or Planetary Life. Next, I'd like to show you the single client or round-based solution. Here, all creatures of a generation are let loose in a level and wander about. The player tries to fight their way through the level and achieve some objective. Once all creatures died or the player has reached the objective, performance is computed and the new generation is bred for the next round, while the player gets a chance to re-equip or distribute skill points. I have actually implemented a prototype of this setup and I'd like to show it to you. I chose a small cave for this prototype so that runs are quick. The player character is the early version of what will probably be the scout or support class Quick and Deadly. I coded 3 player abilities. First, the crossbow shoots wherever I click. Secondly, I can place turrets which target a random part of the nearest creature. Unlike the last video, they no longer aim perfectly, so a quick creature could be able to avoid the shots. And the third ability is a spell that casts a bright light which forces all creatures to scatter for a short time. Theoretically, picking mushrooms will heal the player, but because I have no respawn system yet, I gave myself a huge amount of health, so I doubt that I'll need healing. The creatures will attack on sight. They can hit me with their head, legs or tails and spit a damaging green liquid at me. The range and damage depend on the creature's body. For example, a longer tail can reach further and a larger head will do more hit damage. Creatures also have some new behavior genes which control how much damage they take before they'll try to run and heal, and whether they target turrets or the player first. I started Generation 0 with 2 species, each holding 5 randomly created creatures. Most of them were pretty easy to beat, but there was at least one type that was quite quick and hard to hit, which dealt a lot of damage especially to my turrets. As the fitness score, I chose the total amount of damage a creature would deal against the turrets and the player. When there's no player nearby, creatures always go and chill by the mushrooms, which means they're usually fully healed when I encounter them. After a few generations, it became evident that these small fast creatures were here to stay. They're hard to hit, and as you can see, they target the turrets first. They do quite a bit of damage before I can finally beat them. The other species evolved large bodies that are easy to hit, but they can take a ton of damage and they single hit my turrets with their huge heads. Generation 8 was intense. When the creatures ganged up on me, they felt almost impossible to kill, and I took quite a bit of damage. They would destroy my turrets much faster than I could put them up. It was around this point that I frequently used the bright light spell to try to get some space. Despite my huge amount of health, they almost killed me. So I had to change plans and starting setting up traps, which I then lured them into. This sometimes worked. In the last generation I went even further. I set up a similar trap, but because they ran and healed themselves so frequently, I ended up pushing them into the trap with the bright light spell. Overall, I was very happy with how this turned out. The game was already very fun to play and a lot more challenging than I had anticipated. Also, the two species evolved quite differently despite having the exact same setup and target function. I already had to use some actual strategies like forcing a creature out of their hiding spot with a bright light. One of the next things I need to add is that damaging a body part influences the creature abilities. For example, a damaged tail should no longer be able to hit you, and damaging the legs should slow the creature down. This will pave the way for a lot more tactical gameplay. What's cool about this single client setup is that players directly influence evolution. In this setup, I could also let players customize the fitness score to change the evolution process. However, because each creature is only met once, randomness in the fights or spawn points have a huge effect on creature performance and thus on evolution. Because the creature generation takes time, I had to wait a few minutes between rounds. This limits the amount of creatures that the system can test. Also, since the players need to fight every single monster, if I'm not careful, it can feel like grinding. The centralized server setup might be able to solve some of these issues. Here, the generations are created on a remote server. When players play the game, they download a random subset of the current generation. After each match, the game reports scores back to the server. Another client, or a party of clients in the multiplayer scenario, downloads a different set of creatures and reports scores for those. At 12 o'clock each night, the scores are aggregated and the next generation is created using these results. The biggest downside of this setup is that players would again not directly influence evolution, at least not by themselves. I like all three approaches and might implement aspects from all of them, or make them available as separate game modes. There are a few challenges to overcome, but I believe these sort of experimental elements is where indie games can truly shine. The working prototype made me very hopeful, so I'm excited for the future of Where Beasts Were Born. If you're excited too, there are a few more things you can already check out now to support the game. For example, if you have ideas regarding the game, comment below or join the new Discord server. I've also set up a Steam page, and wishlisting the game will keep you informed and has a huge effect on how the game gets promoted by Steam. And I have a surprise for you. A friend of mine built an online version of the Beast Generator that you can try out on our website. You can choose 2 parents and let them breed. Their DNAs will get mixed and mutated to create a new child. If you support the game on Patreon, you will get access to some advanced options and can even input your own custom DNA. We regularly replace the parents by a random subset of the newly created children, so generations will gradually change over time. If you come across a cool creature, make sure to take a screenshot and post it on Discord. Alright, I should get back to coding. See you soon in the world of Where Beasts Were Born.